question of privilege from the honourable member for Toronto Centre.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And colleagues, it's with considerable notes tell me I'm to say that it's with considerable regret and some emotion, but I think the emotion has betrayed me. But, Mr. Speaker, I have advised you, sir, that I will be standing down as Member of Parliament for Toronto Centre effective July the 2nd. I don't wish to take a lot of time of the House to share that news with you, but I did want a chance to say thank you to my electors. The electors of Toronto Centre, known as Rosedale when I first ran, had perhaps the good sense to turn me down the first 2 times I ran, so I learned something about democracy. They subsequently elected me 5 times. There will be members of this House who think they were right the first time, others who will think they were right the second. That is what makes a great democracy, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank them as having had the chance to represent one of the great ridings and diverse ridings of this country. I'd like to thank my wife, Kathy, my children, and my family and friends who have supported me. You all know we wouldn't be here without that support. I'd also, Mr. Speaker, j'aimerais parler un peu.
I'd like to say a few words about the privilege of being elected to one of the best parliaments in the world. It's an enormous privilege to sit in this House, and it's very difficult to think that I will no longer have access to this place that is so sacred to all of us. And I'd like to thank the clerk and all of the staff, because too often we do our work without acknowledging what they do for us here and in committee.
Capacity to do our jobs and represent our constituents is enormously enhanced by their work, and I thank them. And I know from your applause, you thank them from your hearts as well. I had the opportunity of serving as your foreign minister and as your defense minister, and I could not leave this place without thanking the extraordinary efforts and thanking the representatives of our foreign service who do us so much proud as they work for us around the world, tirelessly, selflessly. And I also could not step down without recognizing the fantastic privilege to have been the defense minister and work with our young men and women in uniform who every day risk their lives for us, for their country, and do it so well. Prime Minister, it is your privilege to call by-election. People of my riding, I hope, will understand why I believe it is important that they be represented by a future voice rather than someone from the past. All parties in the House have representatives now nominated to run in that riding, and I would ask you, sir, that they should have the opportunity to be represented in this place as early as possible, for the sake of our democracy and the sake of our future. And in closing, colleagues, I just want to say one thing about this place and about the civility of this place. There's been a lot in the press recently about the lack of civility in the House. It may be attributable to the minority situation we're in, it may be attributable to a lot of causes. But colleagues, surely we owe it to ourselves to disagree without being disagreeable. We don't need to do that. I believe that everyone in this House carries within him or her the desire to serve our country, and whether you have that desire or not, the capacity to affect the future lives of every citizen of this great land and, to some extent, others around the globe. Let us treat each other with the respect that that thought brings, what we bring to this place. Let us respect one another, and in so doing, I believe that our fellow countrymen will respect this institution and respect us for the work we do.
I think it's here, and then
Order. I believe we're going to have des déclarations additionnelles conséquentes.
Additional statements following from the comments from the Honourable Member for Toronto Centre.
Order. L'honorable chef.
The Honourable Leader of the official opposition, I believe, wishes to say a few things about the point of order we've just heard. So, I now recognize the Honourable Leader of the official opposition to make his comments.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Tribute to the career of an exceptional Member of Parliament. The Member for Toronto Centre served this House in many roles, as Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Defence, and most recently as Leader of the Opposition. But his most important role was unofficial. He served this House as the very model of a gentleman. As he said, his own career is a kind of a model of perseverance. He first stood for election in 1984, finished somewhat behind Mr. David Crombie. He ran again in 1988, this time coming much closer to victory, but close is never good enough. So in 1993, he ran a third time and won, and this House has surely been the better because of it. He made his mark as chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. He presided over a series of unanimous reports. Well, Mr. Speaker, looking back over the current session of Parliament, the magnitude of that achievement should not be lost on any of us. But his greatest achievements were still to come. In 2001, he was appointed Minister of Foreign Affairs. Consider the difficulty of this job. In a world shaken by 9/11, on the eve of the G8 summit of Kananaskis. Yet the Member for Toronto Centre handled his new responsibilities with ease. Not only that, to those of us in Cabinet, it seemed as though he had always been there. But even more significantly, he was Minister of Foreign Affairs at a time when Canada was debating one of the most historic important decisions, whether to become involved in the coming war in Iraq. As well, all know now, but could only guess at the time, our decision not to support that war was a momentous one for Canada. The member for Toronto Centre knew it was the right decision, and I applaud him for it. His deep competence and his mastery of policy made him the right choice for Minister of Defence. He oversaw the single largest increase in Canada's defence spending over a decade, an increase of $13 billion in the 2005 budget. What a Minister of Defence he was, Mr. Speaker. When the previous Prime Minister resigned, it was clear that one man had the gravity, the strength of personality, and the moral authority required to serve our party as interim leader and to serve this House as leader of the opposition. The member asked for nothing in return, save the chance to serve his party and his country. And serve them he did with honor and distinction. In retirement, the member will spend more time, much deserved, with his wife, Cathy, their 2 children, and their many grandchildren. He will also return to his previous career, but I know that he will always stay very close to this House, to his party, and to the service for his country. I wish him the best of luck in these modest enterprises, and I hope he is able to make a living at it. On behalf of every Liberal, every member of this House, and every Canadian, let me say to the member for Toronto Centre, thank you for your service, your talent, and your inspiration. I can only wish the next generation of leaders can learn from your example. Et j'ai gardé la fin.
And for the end, in French, my colleague from Toronto Centre speaks French admirably well. And to me, he certainly represents the enshrinement in the city of Toronto, all the cosmopolitanism of that great city, and that's why we appreciated him as a colleague for everything he embodied for Canada, for the world, and we'd like to thank him from a colleague from Montreal to a colleague from Toronto.
Le très honorable.
The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just expressed to my colleague from Toronto Centre that this is a very sudden development, but all the same, Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to salute, recognize, and congratulate the Honourable Member for Toronto Centre on his career, his long and distinguished career, both outside and inside the House of Commons.
To recognize and to appreciate the incredible career, really lifetime career, of the Honourable Member for Toronto Centre. It's been noted already by both the member and his leader that he took a long time to get here, was very persistent in trying to get here. I must say I went through a similar experience. I ran once and was defeated. I still can't find anyone who voted against me, but I'm sure he knows the same phenomenon as well. Nevertheless, I think what's important to note, Mr. Speaker, in that all this perseverance to come to the House of Commons and to engage in public service was not something that the Honourable Member for Toronto Centre really needed in any way, shape or form. He had, long before coming here, an outstanding private life. He was outstandingly successful as a corporate director, as a lawyer, and as an academic whose expertise was valued both nationally and internationally. He certainly had no need for the trials and tribulations of elected public office. But nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, he took those on was ultimately successful in his electoral quest, and then went on to achieve great things in a parliamentary career. Before he even entered cabinet, he had a long career as noted as chairman of a committee, a career, frankly, that was very successful, both a parliamentary and an interparliamentary career. And then, of course, went on in cabinet to hold two of the most important and most high visible jobs one can hold in the government of Canada. First as Minister of Foreign Affairs, and then as Minister of National Defence. He served with great distinction in both roles, Mr. Speaker, but I think he served, if I don't mind saying so, with highest distinction in the job he was to attain next, and that was to be Leader of the Opposition. Now, I should tell you, Mr. Speaker, you know well, and I certainly have conveyed to my friend opposite, the Leader of the Opposition is never an easy job to have. It's certainly the one job in the country where everybody, including it seems at times everyone in your own party, thinks they could do it better than you, and very often you have a sense that they would like to do the job well. Now, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member for Toronto Centre had more than that sense. In fact, while he was doing the job, several of his colleagues were actually out there competing for it, which I'm sure did not make that job any easier. But I have to say, as I've said before, I do think, and I think we should all recognize, that he really did a tremendous job as Leader of the Opposition. He conducted himself with great intelligence, with great passion, and with great integrity, and I think we should all appreciate his efforts as Leader. We, of course, Mr. Speaker, in that role, he and I disagreed about very many things. I recall on one occasion we even disagreed about the various ways in which one should or should not wear silk. So it's fair to say that our disagreements covered a wide range of issues. But in retrospect, Mr. Speaker, I think we agreed on a couple of subjects where I think the country was better for our agreement, and I think where that agreement will prove to be recognized over time.
As was already mentioned by the Leader of the Official Opposition, the honourable member for Toronto Centre is a great champion and defender of French in Canada and our French-Canadian heritage in Canada. And Mr. Speaker, he joins with us on the very important resolution recognizing Quebecers as a nation within a united Canada. And I'd like to thank him for his efforts along those lines, Mr. Speaker.
Also, Mr. Speaker, as the Minister of National Defence, of course, the member for Toronto Centre was involved in another difficult decision, and that was to support Canada's involvement in the United Nations action in Afghanistan. The member made many difficult decisions while he was Minister of National Defence regarding Canada's involvement in Afghanistan. He has stood by those decisions and stood by that mission, and I know that we on this side, and I think our troops, deeply appreciate his commitment in that regard. Speaker, I assume that a member and a gentleman as active and accomplished as the member for Toronto Centre will now be involved in the life of both activity as well as some retirement. I would say whether it's retirement or whether it's future endeavours or whatever combination, I hope you will indulge me in wishing Bill, Kathy, and all of your family all the best in the future.
The honourable member for Joliette. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the leader of the Bloc Québécois and members for La Pointe de l'Île are disappointed not to be here in the House to pay tribute to the member for Toronto Centre because they're among his great admirers. They will surely join with us in paying tribute to his work as a parliamentarian and also his very respectful attitude at all times, and I can assure him of the affection of all members from the Bloc Québécois who've greatly appreciated working with him. I had the opportunity myself to work with him on the Foreign Affairs and International Trade Committee for 4 years, and I can testify to the fact that the Leader of the Opposition already said this. Our unanimous reports were largely due to his attitude, which was a humanist attitude. He wanted to transcend party lines to get to the root of problems and find solutions that effectively dealt with the issues that the committee was working on. It was his leadership on the Foreign Affairs Committee that paved the way for this unanimity. And I noticed on other committees that other colleagues were quite different in their approach, and we rarely managed to come up with unanimous reports. So I'd like to congratulate him on that. I'd also like to point out that for us, and perhaps not just the Bloc Québécois, but all Quebec members, we have a particularly affectionate bond with the member for Toronto Centre because he was born in Montreal, and a lot of his family have very deep roots in Quebec, including La Naudière region. So that fact is an added contributor to our strong ties with the member for Toronto Centre. And I think the fact that he was born in Montreal goes a long way to explaining his desire to learn to speak French so excellently. And he sets an example for all. But there's also the fact that he's a great Francophile, not just in Canada, but throughout the Francophonie. The member for Toronto Centre is recognized as a defender of French. And I think that's an added asset that he brought to the House of Commons. As you know, he studied law, not just here, but also in France. And he even presided the Toronto Alliance Française. He's a brilliant academic. He taught at the Faculty of Law, and he was elected in 1993. But I wanted to, I know that mention was made of his 2 defeats, but his four elections show how much his constituents, 5 times rather, 1 election and 4 re-elections. So he was greatly admired and valued by his constituents, and we share that. He also oversaw the Liberal Party between the prime ministers. And I think he could easily have been a candidate for the leadership of the Liberal Party of Canada. I'd like to congratulate him on the work he did. I already mentioned on the Foreign Affairs and International Trade Committee, but he really had vision, and that is necessary when you're dealing with problems as serious and multifaceted as those on the Foreign Affairs Committee. And that vision enabled him, I believe, among other things, when we were debating Canada's intervention in Iraq, that enabled him to have the right attitude for a long time. I'm sure he was torn between the 2 options, but ultimately, based on his own humanist, multilateral, cooperative and security-based vision, he came to the conclusion, like the majority of us in the House, that Canada's participation in the Iraq War was inappropriate, contrary to the Afghan mission, which was multilateral and was much clearer at the time. It's less clear now whether that's appropriate, but at the time, the minister had a better idea where we were heading. So all that was put to the service of all Canadians and Quebecers, and if he decided to set up a foreign affairs consultancy firm, the Bloc Québécois would regularly consult him before making our decisions, because we know that his knowledge is vast. So on behalf of the entire Bloc Québécois, We wish him and his family, his wife Catherine, the 2 children, Catherine and Patrick, and the 3 grandchildren, all the best. And I'm convinced that this is only a beginning, not an ending. Thank you.
The honourable member for Toronto, Danforth.
I'm very happy and at the same time sad to share a few words about my friend, our friend, the member for Toronto Centre. This is an individual who worked hard for his constituents, and a large number of constituents in his riding are disadvantaged. The riding of it was called Rosedale a few years ago, but you have to understand that in that same riding there are among the poorest neighborhoods in all of Canada. And I know this because I was elected municipally for the same neighborhoods for years.
And I can tell you that Bill Graham was there. The member for Toronto Centre was present among his constituents at all times, working with them for social justice, for their welfare. This is not someone who lived far away from those who need help.
What a member of Parliament who's truly committed to all of his constituents can do. It would have probably been very easy for the member for Toronto Centre to have found many reasons not to be a part of a lot of community activities. He was a minister. He was a brilliant chairman of the Foreign Affairs and International Development Committee. He served his country in so many different ways, but yet I can attest to how devoted he was to his constituents. And we would often be together in some of the poorest neighborhoods where some of the greatest homelessness is found, where people are really struggling. And Bill Graham would be there, Mr. Speaker. And that's because he was someone who took his responsibilities and is someone who has always taken his responsibilities very, very seriously. He is warmly welcomed in the parts of the community that he represented. He was also one of the first to stand for civil rights, human rights, for gays and lesbians in our country at a time when that wasn't very popular. And I must say that I was always very impressed by his dedication to human rights and his participation in such a celebratory and principled way with people who are often on the margins and can still feel that marginalization today, but they'll never feel it when it comes to the member from Toronto Centre. He's been honoured many, many times, and rightly so. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I was thinking of the things we share in common. We were both born in Montreal, both spent some time in the same academic institution at the University of Toronto. He far more famous and illustrious than my time there, I must say. And then we also had the opportunity to contest the 1993 election in Toronto Centre. In fact, we were both trying to defeat David MacDonald at the time, who was the member and a Conservative. I succeeded in converting David MacDonald to a socialist, but that was really the only consolation I had. The member for Toronto Centre taught me the lesson that you need to lose a couple of times before you earn the right to be in this place. He did assure me after a couple of beer one night when the three of us would go out after all candidates' debates, a practice which I'd like to propose to the other party leaders, by the way. We would go out for a couple of beers after the debates, and we would talk about job sharing and the issues of the day. He did assure me that someday I would probably be elected, but not in his riding. He was right once again. Mr. Speaker, I want to say one other thing, and that is that I've always felt that despite his sort of straight-back demeanor and his very dignified presence, the fact is that the honourable member is very approachable at the human level. And we had a number of occasions to talk about issues together one-on-one, and every single time I found a dignity, an openness, a friendship, the kind of conversation that you really wish could happen between all of us much more often. And when he stood in his place to debate, you knew several fundamentals about this man. First of all, that he felt that he was here to serve the others and his country. And you also knew that he loved his country very profoundly every time that he spoke. And you finally knew that he respected this place and the opportunity that it provides for all of us to do our best on behalf of our fellow citizens. I think what we're talking about here is a true parliamentarian, someone who can serve as an example for people coming newly to politics. I hope that they will study the record of Bill Graham. I hope that he will accept, on behalf of my caucus, the New Democratic Party, and all our members and supporters across the country, our gratitude, because we appreciate the service of the member. And we also want to thank his family for sharing him with us over these last number of years, and wish him well in the future. Merci beaucoup.
On behalf of all honourable members, I want to express our thanks to the honourable member for Toronto Centre for his service in the House. It's been a pleasure for me as Speaker to work with him as Minister and Leader of the Opposition. I appreciated his remarks about respectfulness in the question period and in dealings between members, and I hope all honourable members will bear those comments in mind overnight, so that tomorrow's question period will be the very model of civility that we can all look forward to. And for that, I thank the honourable member for Toronto, Senator Rosedale, for his friendship over the years, and wish him and his wife, Kathy, the very best in his retirement.